My name is Emily. I'm a single mother, and this story happened one December in the United States of America, just a few days before Christmas, when I had more worries than dollars in my bank account and more love than I knew what to do with. That afternoon, the sky over our street in Columbus was a flat gray, the kind that makes the whole neighborhood look washed out. My little rented house sat between two bigger, prettier homes, each with bright lights and perfect wreaths on their front doors. I had wrapped a thin string of old lights around my porch railing, and half of them didn't even work. Still, when they flickered on, my son Luke said they made our house look cozy, and I decided to believe him. Inside, the heater hummed, and a pot of cheap tomato soup simmered on the stove, filling the rooms with a warm, simple smell. I sat at the wobbly kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at the banking app. The numbers on the screen were clear, $218 total in my checking account. My rent was due in 2 weeks. The gas bill and the electricity bill were waiting on the counter, both marked with second notice. I'd already done the math, more times than I wanted to admit. After rent and bills and groceries, I would have maybe $50 left if nothing went wrong. $50 for Christmas. $50 to turn December into something magical for an 8-year-old boy who deserved the world. I swallowed hard and tapped the call button on my mother's name. She lived with my father in a nice 2-story house in a quieter part of the city, with a wide driveway and a big tree in the front yard. While the phone rang, I pictured their living room, the big fireplace, the huge Christmas tree they always put by the window, and the expensive ornaments they had collected over the years. I remembered how, when I was a child, that room felt like the center of the world. "Hi, honey," my mom answered, her voice warm, like she'd been expecting me. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," I said, though my throat was tight. "Just trying to figure out Christmas." She let out a long sigh. "Oh, Emily, it's a tough year for everyone. Your dad's hours got cut again, and the house needed repairs. We just don't have money for gifts this year. Not for anyone. We'll focus on spending time together instead. That's what matters, right?" I pressed my lips together, staring at the peeling corner of paint on the kitchen wall. "So, no gifts at all? Not even something small for the kids?" "No, sweetheart," she said. "We can't. We're really struggling. I knew you'd understand." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. It's funny how parents still talk like you're a child, even when you're sitting in your own house worrying about rent. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I get it. No money for gifts. Just family time." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the words settle. No money for gifts. I wasn't angry yet. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired of counting every dollar. Tired of pretending that just being together could fill the space where a small, wrapped toy or a new book might have gone. I knew what it was like to grow up with piles of presents under a big bright tree. I also knew what it felt like to see your kid's eyes when he's trying to be brave about having less. Luke came into the kitchen then, his socked feet sliding a little on the worn floor. His hair was messy, and he was hugging his favorite toy car, the one I'd found at a yard sale for $2. "Mom," he asked, glancing at the small plastic tree in the corner of our living room, "do you think there will be presents this year?" I took a slow breath and turned to him. "Sweetheart," I said, "Grandma and Grandpa don't have money for gifts this year. I don't have much either. I'll try to get you something small, but it might not be a lot." He looked at the tree for a long moment, his fingers tightening around the little car. Then he lifted his face and gave me a crooked, brave smile that hurt my heart. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "We don't need a lot, right? We have each other." That was Luke. Just 8 years old, living in a small house in America with a mother who was trying her best and already learning how to make himself smaller so he wouldn't be a burden. I walked over, wrapped my arms around him, and promised myself that somehow, some way, I would make this Christmas feel like love, even if I could only spend a few dollars to do it. Christmas Eve came faster than I was ready for. The week before, I had picked up an extra shift at the grocery store in Columbus, counting every dollar in my head while customers filled their carts with expensive chocolate and big turkeys. By the time Christmas Eve morning arrived, I had about $48 left in my account. I bought Luke a small building set for $12 and a book about space for $8, both wrapped in the cheapest paper I could find. That left just enough for gas to drive to my parents' house and a few basic groceries. It wasn't much, but when I placed the two little gifts under our small plastic tree, Luke's eyes still lit up. We drove to my parents' place in their quieter neighborhood across the city. Their two-story house looked like something from a Christmas movie. White lights lined the roof, a big wreath hung on the front door, and I could see the tall tree glowing in the front window. For a second, I was a child again, stepping out of the car in my winter coat, running inside to mountains of presents. Then I reminded myself of my mother's words, "No money for gifts this year. Not for anyone." Inside, the house was warm and smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The tree was decorated with the same crystal ornaments and fancy ribbons they'd had for years, but there were only a few small wrapped boxes under it. My mother hugged us and kissed Luke on the head. My father patted his shoulder and called him champ, like he always did. My sister Claire and her husband Mark were already there with their daughters, Lily and Sophie, both wearing matching red dresses that looked new. I tried not to think about how much they might have cost. We all gathered in the living room. My mother handed around mugs of cocoa. She kept talking about how this year is all about togetherness, not gifts, and how money isn't everything. I smiled and nodded at the right moments, even though the words stung a little. Luke sat close to me on the sofa, his small hand resting on my arm. I watched him look at the tree, at the few plain boxes, at his cousins giggling on the floor. There was a quiet hope in his eyes, like he was still waiting for some kind of surprise. When it was time to open the presents that were there, my parents gave Claire's girls each a small box with new hairbands and glittery pens. "Just something tiny," my mom said quickly, almost apologizing. "Nothing big this year." They didn't give anything to Luke. He noticed, of course. Kids always notice. But instead of saying anything, he leaned into my side and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. I'll open my presents from you at home." He gave me that same sad little smile, the one that tried so hard to make things easier for me. On the drive back to our house that night, the streets were quiet, and the city lights glowed against the dark winter sky. Luke held his new book in his lap, turning it over and tracing the picture of the planets with his finger. I told myself that love was enough, that he would remember the feeling of us being together more than anything else. But deep down, a part of me still wished my parents had found even $5 for him, just enough for a small toy or a pair of gloves with a candy cane taped on top. Something that said, "We see you." A few days later, when the holiday rush had settled and I was back in my little house in Ohio, I finally had a quiet evening. Luke was in his room, making a tiny space station, on the floor with his new building set and an old cardboard box. I curled up on the worn sofa with my phone, just mindlessly scrolling through social media, trying to forget how tight money still felt, even after Christmas. I wasn't looking for anything. I certainly wasn't looking for pain. Then I saw it. It was my sister Claire's post. A bright, polished photo of my parents' living room on Christmas Day. Only this time, it didn't look like the night we were there. The tree was surrounded by piles of expensive-looking gift bags and big boxes wrapped in shiny paper. Lily and Sophie were in new outfits, different from the ones they'd worn when we visited. The table in the background was covered with a grand dinner, roast beef, a huge ham, bottles of wine, plates stacked high with sides and desserts. I swiped to the next photo. Claire holding up a designer handbag, the kind I'd only ever seen behind glass in a store. Another photo of Mark with a new smartwatch still in its box. The girls posing with new tablets, headphones, and fancy shoes. I didn't have to guess who had paid for all of that. I saw my parents in the middle of one of the photos, grinning like they were the stars of some perfect family story. Then I read the caption, "Best Christmas with family. So blessed. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for the luxury gifts and amazing dinner." My chest went cold. No money for gifts this year. Not for anyone. That's what they had told me. I stared at the screen, feeling my hands start to shake. At that moment, Luke walked into the room, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, what are you looking at?" he asked. I thought about hiding the phone. Then I thought about the little boy who had sat under that same tree with empty hands and a brave smile. I turned the screen so he could see. He stared at the photos, taking in every detail, the gifts, the dinner, the smiles. After a long moment, he whispered, "Grandma bought them all that?" "Yes," I said quietly. He swallowed hard. "On Christmas?" "Yes." His voice was so small when he asked, "Grandma, aren't we family?" The words went straight through me, like someone had opened my chest and pressed on my heart. I pulled him into my arms, holding him close, and I knew something inside me had changed forever. That night, after Luke's question, "Aren't we family?" kept echoing in my head, the house felt too quiet. He had fallen asleep in his small room, hugging his pillow, the book about space lying open beside him. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. My son, my whole world, already learning that love is not always fair. I closed his door gently and went back to the kitchen, where the only sound was the ticking clock and the low hum of the fridge. I sat down at the worn table with my phone in front of me. The room smelled faintly of dish soap and leftover soup. Outside, I could see snow gathering along the streetlights in our Ohio neighborhood, making everything look soft and quiet, almost peaceful. But inside me, there was a storm. I opened the social media app again, and Claire's post stared back at me like a bright, cruel joke. "Best Christmas with family." The words felt like they were meant to erase us, like we didn't count as part of that family at all. I scrolled through the photos again. The luxury gifts. The grand dinner. My parents in the center, smiling proudly. They hadn't looked at me like that in years. Not when I told them I was pregnant with Luke. Not when I worked 2 jobs to stay afloat. Not when I brought over small, homemade dishes to their holiday dinners because I couldn't afford more. But there they were, glowing with joy in front of gifts that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. "We don't have money for gifts this year. Not for anyone." My fingers were shaking as I opened the family group chat. I stared at the blank message box for a long time, watching the little cursor blink. Part of me wanted to delete the app, turn off the phone, and pretend I had never seen the post. It would be easier to stay quiet, to swallow the hurt like I always did. But then I saw Luke's face in my mind, heard his small voice. "Grandma, aren't we family?" That question pushed me forward. I started typing. I saw the Christmas photos on Claire's page. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The reply came fast. Claire wrote first. "Isn't it cute?" The girls were so happy. Mom and Dad totally spoiled us this year, faced with tears of joy wrapped gift. My jaw clenched. Then my mother replied, "Oh, Emily, please don't misunderstand. We didn't want you to feel bad. Your situation is different. We didn't think you'd mind." There it was. Different. That word again, like a polite label slapped over something ugly. I took a deep breath and typed slowly, carefully, making sure I didn't soften the truth this time. "You told me you didn't have money for gifts this year. Not for anyone. Luke sat there on Christmas Eve with nothing from you. He tried to be brave about it. A few days later, he sees these photos. Luxury gifts, a big dinner, all from you. He asked me, 'Grandma, aren't we family?' I didn't know what to say. I watched the chat bubble show, typing, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, my dad wrote, 'You're overreacting. Claire and Mark do a lot for us. They help with the house, drive us places, pay for things sometimes. We wanted to thank them. You should understand that.' There it was laid out clearly. In their eyes, love was something you earned by being useful, by being convenient. Claire and Mark brought them help and comfort. Luke and I brought them what? Need? Guilt? A reminder that they had a daughter who didn't live in a big house, who struggled to pay her bills, who couldn't offer them weekend trips or fancy dinners. My heart felt heavy, but also strangely steady. I was done trying to twist their actions into something kinder than they were. I was done making excuses. I typed again, slower this time, reading each word out loud in my head as I wrote it. "I do understand. I understand that you had money and chose not to spend even a little on your grandson. Not a toy, not a book, not a single thing. You could have told me the truth. You could have said you wanted to do something special for Claire's family. Instead, you looked me in the eye and said there was no money for gifts for anyone. That was a lie. I will not let my son feel like he is less than his cousins. We're done. My thumb hovered over the send button for a second. My heart was pounding. Then I pressed it. The message went through. The chat fell silent. No typing dots. No excuses. No instant apologies. Just my words, sitting there in the bright screen light of my quiet kitchen. I turned the phone face down and wrapped my arms around myself. For a moment, I felt like a little girl again, scared of making my parents angry. But then I thought of Luke, asleep in his small room, trusting me to protect him. I've got you, I whispered to the empty room. I choose us. Outside, the snow kept falling over our small American street, and inside, I sat alone with a new, sharp truth. I had finally drawn a line. I didn't know what would come next. I just knew I could not go back. When I woke up the morning after I sent that message, we're done. The air in my little house in Columbus felt different. It was like the silence had weighed. I moved through the kitchen making coffee, listening to the heater hum and the pipes creak, and part of me wanted to grab my phone and check the family chat. Instead, I left it face down on the counter. I didn't want to see whatever excuses or anger might be waiting. I didn't want to read long paragraphs about how I'd hurt their feelings, when all I had done was tell the truth. Luke padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up. I poured him some cereal and watched him eat, the way his legs swung under the chair, the way he tried to act like everything was normal. I knew he felt the distance too. Kids can taste tension in the air, even when no one says a word. I decided I would make the day as gentle as possible. We played a board game on the living room floor, watched a silly movie on my old laptop, and later walked down the snowy sidewalk to the small park at the end of our street. I pushed him on the swings and watched the gray sky over our American neighborhood, feeling both proud and tired. I had finally stood up for us. I hoped I hadn't broken something that could never be fixed. 2 days passed like that. Simple, quiet, careful. I didn't hear from my parents. No calls, no texts. My sister posted more perfect photos with captions about holiday joy, and I tried my best not to look. At night, when Luke was asleep, I sometimes sat at the table with the light off, just watching the snow drift past the window and wondering if this was it, if I had finally torn the thin thread that still connected me to my parents. I knew I didn't regret defending my son. But grief doesn't ask if you did the right thing. It just shows up and sits beside you. On the third evening, it was already dark when we finished dinner. Luke was in the living room building a space city out of his little plastic bricks. I was rinsing dishes in the sink when I heard a car door close outside. At first I thought it was a neighbor, but then there was a knock at the front door. 3 quick knocks, then a pause, like someone was nervous. My heart jumped. I dried my hands, took a breath, and walked to the door. When I opened it, my parents were standing on the small front step. Snowflakes clung to my mother's hair, and my father had his old winter coat zipped all the way up. My mother's eyes were red and puffy, like she had been crying for a long time. My father looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with something more than age. For a second, none of us said anything. The cold air blew in around them, smelling like snow and car exhaust. "Emily," my mother said at last, her voice shaking. "Please, can we come in?" I could have said no. A small part of me wanted to. I wanted to protect the fragile calm Luke and I had built in our little rented house. But then I thought of my son seeing his grandparents turn away at the door, and I couldn't do it. I stepped back and opened the door wider. They came inside, looking around like they were really seeing my home for the first time. The secondhand sofa, the small plastic tree still standing in the corner, the thin curtains, the scuffed floor. My father's gaze lingered on Luke's shoes by the door, worn at the toes. My mother's eyes landed on the 2 empty hooks where coats would hang if we had more than one each. "Where's Luke?" my dad asked quietly. "In the living room," I said. "He can hear everything, so please remember that." We all moved into the living room. Luke looked up from the floor, his little space city spread out around him. His eyes went wide when he saw them. "Grandma?" "Grandpa," he said, unsure, like he didn't know what the rules were anymore. My mother's face crumpled. She knelt down right there on the old rug. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "Can I give you a hug?" He looked at me first. I gave a small nod. He walked over to her, slow and serious, and she pulled him into her arms and started to cry. Real, shaking sobs that I hadn't seen from her in years. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying into his hair. "We were wrong. We hurt you. We hurt your mom. I'm so sorry." Luke stood stiffly for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her neck. "You said you didn't have any money," he mumbled. "But you did." My mother swallowed hard. "You're right," she said. "We lied. We thought we were doing something kind for your aunt and uncle, but we forgot to be kind to you. That was wrong. You are our family. We should never have made you feel otherwise." My father stepped closer to me. His voice was rough when he spoke. "You were right too," he said. "About all of it. We chose, and we chose badly. Claire and Mark, they help us with the car, the house, money sometimes. We got used to thinking we owed them more. And we told ourselves you'd understand. That you were strong. That you didn't need much." He shook his head. "But we forgot that your boy needs to feel loved. That you need to feel equal. I'm sorry, Emily." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to hold myself together. "You didn't just forget," I said. "You lied. You looked me in the eye and said, 'No money for gifts. Not for anyone.' And my son sat there on your couch with empty hands. Then days later, he sees you giving luxury gifts and a grand dinner to his cousins. Do you know what he asked me?" My voice cracked. He asked, "Grandma, aren't we family?" My mother closed her eyes, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Those words have been stuck in my head since you sent that message," she said. "I hear them when I wake up. I hear them when I try to sleep. We deserved that message you wrote. We deserved we're done. But we couldn't just let it stay that way without trying to make it right." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, thick and worn from being held too tight. "We brought some money," she said. $500. To help with bills, with groceries, with anything you need. And we bought some gifts for Luke. Not because we're trying to buy forgiveness, but because we finally realized what we should have done in the first place." I looked at the envelope. In another time, I might have grabbed it with relief. But now it just looked like a bandage for a wound that needed stitches, not a quick cover-up. "I don't want money as an apology," I said. "I don't want gifts handed over out of guilt. I want you to understand that he is not second, not extra, not different. If you want to be in his life, it has to be because you truly see him as family, not because you're trying to fix your conscience with dollars." My father nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it your way," he said. "We'll come to his school plays. We'll call just to ask how his day was. We'll take him to the park, to get ice cream, to the library. We'll show up. And we'll accept that you might not trust us for a long time, but we'll keep showing up anyway." Luke slipped his hand into mine. I looked at my parents, tired, tearful, humbled, and felt something shift inside me. Not a clean forgiveness, not yet, but a small opening. "You can stay for a little while," I said quietly. "No presents yet. No big gestures. Just sit with us. Talk to him. Let him see, with his own eyes, whether you mean what you're saying." My mother nodded, wiping her face. My father exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. They took off their coats and sat down on our worn sofa. Luke went back to his space city and started explaining the planets to my dad, who listened as if it were the most important thing in the world. As I watched them talk, I knew things would never go back to how they were. A line had been crossed, and the memory of that Christmas would always sting. But I also knew this. I had stood up for my son, and I had not been silent. I had said, "We're done," and because of that, something false had ended, and something honest had begun. In our small house in America, with mismatched furniture and a cheap plastic tree, I felt a new kind of peace settle over me. Not the peace of pretending everything was fine, but the peace of knowing that from now on, if my parents wanted to be in our lives, they would have to meet us where we were. In the truth, with open eyes, and with the understanding that my son would never again be the invisible one in the corner of the room.